Are you ready to revolutionize your relationship with money? Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where I, Dr. Disha, will be your companion on this exciting adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms. Pearson Ravitz' story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB-GYN at the height of her career. But then, a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery. Her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor. Hey everyone, Dr. Disha Spath here. Welcome back to another episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. Today, I'm excited to share something a bit different with you. I was recently a guest on the TarHeal Podcast, where I had an amazing conversation with Dr. Sara Helvey about my journey into medicine, managing finances as a physician, and practical tips on budgeting and investing. The TarHeal Podcast is known for its insightful discussions with professionals, and I felt right at home sharing my story there. So without further ado, let's get into this special episode, shall we?
Thank you for joining the podcast today, Dr. Spath.
I am so excited to be here. UNC has a very warm place in my heart. I used to visit your campus a lot as a kid, so I'm very excited to be on your podcast.
Well, great. Well, let's talk more about you first. That's how we like to start our podcast. I want to hear a bit about how you became a physician and your path to becoming where you are today.
So my story is somewhat non-traditional for physicians. I moved here to the United States when I was 10 with my mom and my sister after my dad passed away in India. So we moved here, and while I'd gone to an English-speaking school, we moved to the Deep South, Augusta, Georgia, and I really felt like I didn't know the language. So there's a lot of, adjustment. While we were relatively well off in India, when we came here, we were very poor. We had 3 suitcases that we brought our belongings in and basically no assets to our name. We stayed with family that were very generous and, physicians, but then we kind of tried to establish ourselves on our own. It was difficult on subsidized lunches and subsidized housing, and learned the hard way that money matters and how we budget our money, how we spend our money and invest is important. In fact, investing was very foreign. It seemed like something that other people did and people in my situation couldn't. And I've learned since then that really anyone can start investing at any stage of their life, and the government very much tries to make that happen. But initially, it all seemed very scary. So I was very good at budgeting. And then as I progressed through college, got a full ride to UGA and did undergrad and then Medical College of Georgia med school, became an attending and got my first attending salary. I thought I would be, made, right? Going from $50,000, $60,000 a year to $200,000 a year. As a primary care physician, a hospitalist, I thought that this is more money than I could ever want or need, and everything will be possible. But I learned the hard way that it is very easy to overinflate your lifestyle. And when I started as an attending, I was the only earner. My husband had gone back to school. He was an Army captain, and he had gone back to school after getting out of the Army to get his master's. And I was the only one working at the time. And we bought a very lovely home in Savannah, Georgia, on the Intercoastal in a gated community. While it wasn't that expensive in retrospect, at the time felt like a big stretch for us. And we basically overinflated, got into a situation where we felt like we were living paycheck to paycheck and had very little room in our budget and had a lot of student loans. I really felt trapped in my job. I had to go, even though I was having kids at the time. So, I was maternity leave, trying to save for maternity leave. Maternity leave was unpaid. And then trying to nurse and be there for my kids while working as a hospitalist, working long shifts. It was just tough. I realized very quickly that I needed to get my financial stuff together. So I decided to sit down with my husband and really come up with a plan. And we decided to start turning things around. So the first step we took was we sat down and just listed out our debts and our assets, how much we're making and where is it going, right? How much money do we owe to whom and what's the interest rate? Because a lot of the times, we borrow the money, we sign the papers, and then we forget about it and keep making the payments. The interest rate, I didn't know off the top of my head. So anyway, we wrote them all down and then decided to start tackling some of our fixed expenses because we had a lot of them. We had car loans, we had student loans, we had a mortgage, we had 2 mortgages actually because we already owned 1 rental property. So anyway, we started to work at it. But the first part of that was, well, where do we get the extra money to pay more on our debt or invest more? How do we make more room, more delta in between our income and our expenses? So the starting point for that was budgeting. And now budgeting seems like a very hard, difficult thing to do, but it's really just an inventory. It's been done for ages. People balanced their checkbooks in the past, and now we have to track our money too. We made some extra room in our budget and made some delta and started really working at the debt. And quickly, in a 3-year period, we first paid off 2 cars. And then we went after my $238,000 of student loans and refinanced that down to a lower interest rate and then paid off the student loans in 17 months. So while that seems fantastical, even now, in 3 years, we were able to go from a net worth of negative $250,000 to over $1 million. And that happened because of good budgeting and good mindful spending and tracking our spending, being very conscious about where we were putting our money. And while that sounds probably to you like we lived a very terrible lifestyle, we had a lot of fun. We took vacations. We had fun times with the family. And I really look back at that period as one of the best in our lives. And it continues to get better. And so I'm very, very happy about that process now, having that awakening now. And I started writing about it and sharing that on my website and now my podcast.
What a wonderful story. And we're going to talk more about your website. And I know you have your own podcast, so I'm sure that our listeners can listen into some of the podcasts that you've had. You said several things that really resonated with me. Anyone can invest. I think I too thought when I was a resident, that's not for me, and that's for other people who have a lot more money than me. But I don't think that is accurate. I agree with you. And anyone can budget. We all should budget. But I think budget can be this negative word, has a negative connotation to it at times. Scary. Exactly what you said. I can't do the fun things and you're on a budget. So, which isn't true either. And also not just unique to physicians, but people tend to spend more money when they make more money. They tend to just change their lifestyles to accommodate and then end up living paycheck to paycheck. And I've been there as well myself, even prior to residency. So, but one thing I wanted to get into now is just hearing a little bit more about how do we make budget not a negative word? How do we convince people that budgeting is important, the value behind it? And then also you mentioned on your website, being frugal versus being cheap. I'd like to hear a little bit about that too.
Absolutely. Love talking about this because it's been such a powerful force in my life to learn how to budget. And I love teaching about it. Let's state it like it is. Budget is probably the most unsexy word in history, right behind diet. The thing is that when you look at your bank account, all you see is a number. You don't see what that money needs to do. If you happen to look at it on the day that you got paid, you think you're rich. And if you happen to look at it at the end of the month, you think you're poor. But really, it doesn't give you any insight into what that money needs to do and where it needs to go, right? You probably don't know off the top of your head when your next electricity bill is hitting, right? So what the budget does is it gives you a plan. There's a difference between I'm on a budget And I have a budget for that. The I'm on a budget is restrictive. It feels restrictive. Whereas I have a budget for that makes you feel confident that you can make that payment, no problem, and do that fun thing, buy that concert ticket, go there, have fun, and still be confident that you're going to meet your goals and your money is going to be fine and you're not going to overdraw your account, right? So that's the power of a budget, is that you have a budget for it, that you have a budget for that. And you can make your payments. And the budget is basically just a plan. It's a plan for what your money needs to do. And the more you are mindful of it, the more empowering it is to have that budget. The more that you have things written down and planned for, the better you feel. And so I think the people that don't budget really hate the word, but people that do budget love the word. And that's the reason, because it empowers them. When we think about getting on a budget, though, it feels restrictive. And that's because oftentimes when we start a budget, we're overspending. But when people start budgeting, I simply ask them to monitor. It's like just being mindful, like doing yoga with your money. You are simply observing the money going in and money going out. That's all you're doing. Breath in, breath out for 3 months, right? Take some deep breaths, sit down, and look at where your money is going. It makes it easier if you're tracking it on a spreadsheet. However, there are many different ways to do it, and we can talk about all of those ways. But if you simply start a spreadsheet of the fixed payments that you have and the discretionary spending, break it down. On my website, I have a sample budget spreadsheet that you can use to break down your spending areas and simply start plugging those things in. In fact, a lot of the banks are making this really easy now. Whichever bank that you're working with, see if they have a budgeting tool. They will break down the spending for you, and you can simply just start observing. Write it down, though, and track it. Have a place where you can sort of compare the values. And as you get 3 months of data, you are going to start to realize, even with the first month, for the first time that we started budgeting, I realized I had spent $200 at Starbucks. I wasn't trying to cut back. I was like, I'm just going to watch here. Spent $1,000 on Amazon. How does that happen, right? Well, of course, Amazon has a lot of different things. It has needs and wants, but most of that spending was wants. Even though I didn't really intend to cut back, I started cutting back. I didn't really thought about it next time I went to Starbucks. Can I just make some coffee and take it from home? Do I really need to get that for a $5 cup of coffee at Starbucks? And those kind of decisions, while I don't advocate for people to cut back on every single area of spend on that first month, you're going to start noticing areas where you're overspending and areas where you could get better or areas that you're pretty good about. And as you get that 3 months of data, that's if you're trying to make a bigger delta between your income and expenses, that's when you can get more mindful. The starting point, though, with a spending plan, with any kind of spending, though, is that you should focus on the top 3 areas of spending first. That's housing, transportation, and food. Those are the places that we spend the most money on, just living. If you can keep your housing reasonable, I understand that's difficult to do when you already have a place, but you can maybe make a better choice the next time you move, right? Or the next time you buy a house. Try to keep the housing reasonable and don't become house poor. That's step 1 in making some delta. Transportation, not buying that sports car as soon as you become an attending, trying to pay off the cars that you already own. If you can keep your transportation reasonable, you can make some good headway. And then food. It's so easy to overspend on food. There's so many different ways, places you can get food. So that's an area where you can really streamline and optimize and save some money if you're mindful and create good habits.
I was going to ask, with regard to managing your first budget when you're monitoring, are you also monitoring who is spending? Like, let's say you're in a house of a couple people, or you even have kids. Are you monitoring what's being spent on the children versus mom versus dad or the partners?
So in my family, we have a kids section on our budget, and then the rest of it, it's all family spend. So if you're married, it's very important that you budget with your partner, because divorce costs more than anything you're spending right now. It's very, very important that both you and your partner are on the same team While I could budget on my own, I try not to because, especially in the beginning when we were overspending, it would be me getting mad at a computer screen and then me going and yelling at my husband, right? Not yelling, but certainly speaking. And then it would just be another thing I'm nagging him about, right? I didn't want it to become that. And don't let it become that in your family. You really need to come at it as a team perspective, get your partner on board. The way to do that is the why, right? For me and my husband, the why was, oh my gosh, now we have these two tiny little beings depending on us, and we are not investing as much as we could. We have a lot of debt. We're living paycheck to paycheck. We're both stressed out about money, and we're both fighting about it. So can we get our stuff together? Let's sit down and figure this out, right? Families have done this for generations. They have lived on one physician's salary for generations. We should be able to do the same. And let's figure out how we can make this work and sit down together, make that plan together, make sure your partner's on board with the decisions that you're making. And then I don't recommend splitting out this person spending this much, this person spending this much. I think it's better if you simply just look at it as family spend because there's less finger pointing. But of course, I know I spend on Amazon and he spends on D&D or whatever gaming site that he has. And that's okay, right? But we try not to point fingers. If there needs to be, usually it's me pointing the finger at myself, like, wow, why am I spending so much on Amazon? And there are ways to cut that down. I've taken the app off my phone, which helps a lot with the impulse spending. If I have to sit down on my desktop and do it, it automatically makes me spend less because I don't have that much time to sit down on my desktop. So things like that, or giving yourself a waiting period, putting it in your cart and then waiting 2 or 3 days and asking yourself if you really need or want it is another way. Anyway, so I think it's very important that you work together.
I agree. That's a great idea about the Amazon too, by the way.
Forget the burdens of tenants and toilets. Equity Multiple simplifies your investment journey, letting you invest passively in vetted, professionally managed commercial real estate. Only 5% of reviewed investments reach Equity Multiple's platform, with our asset management working on each from funding through exit to maximize your returns. Whether you're on the couch in your exec chair or the backseat of a ride share, Equity Multiple brings cash-flowing real estate investments straight to your fingertips. All investments involve risk. Visit equitymultiple.com to learn more.
So you talked about how to start budgeting. I think from your website, there was an article talked about the budget date. Anything else on how to get started budgeting?
Yeah. So the other thing that you really need to think about is how is the budgeting going to work in your family and what works for both people? Because initially when we started, I subscribed to YNAB, one of the apps that you can use to budget. There are many different ways you can budget. Some people call it a backwards budget when you pay yourself first. Basically, you decide, okay, these are my goals. I want to make sure I put money in the 529s, into my 401ks, into my IRA. And after that, maybe $1,000 into a brokerage account, right? When you're attending. As a resident, it's going to be things like, I want to make sure I get my bills paid. I want to make sure maybe I save $1,000 a month or $500 a month or $300 a month. But I want to make sure I'm saving that much. So I'm going to go ahead and set up an auto transfer into my savings account, and then I'll spend the rest. So the pay yourself first budget basically takes your goals and you divide it up into monthly payments or monthly transfers or weekly transfers. And you set up that automatic saving before you do anything. You are trying to pay yourself first, right? And this type of budgeting method works well for attendings. It works well when you have a lot of income and are not at the risk of overdrafting your account. Because, if you go ahead and take that money out first, then you have less to spend for the rest of the month. And you have a lot of fixed expenses as residents and less income. So may not work well for residents, but may work well for attendings that have already sort of streamlined their life. Another type of budgeting is called the proportional budget, where you come and examine your spending, maybe quarterly, maybe yearly. But you're looking to see that 50% of your spending is going towards needs. 30% is going towards your wants, and then 20% is going towards saving, investing, or paying down debt. So you really want to make sure you have that 20% there. If it's not there, then you adjust the spending accordingly going forward to meet that goal. But you're basically coming in and checking in on yourself, quarterly or yearly. Again, that works well for people that just want to check in once in a while, but it's not great for people that have very little delta between their income and expenses and are looking for real insight into their problem areas and ways to fix it and accountability going forward. The spreadsheet budget is a line item budget, which basically is what my family does. We sit down, we have a spreadsheet. We have one going back like 7 years. Every month we sit down, we fill it in with all our spend and then look at the delta at the end, then put that delta to work. We put it towards debt or savings or investing. The zero-based budget is a type of line item budget, but the zero-based budget is basically where you give your every dollar that comes into your house a job, and you're actively managing the money that comes in to your bank account. And that's easier to do with apps like YNAB, because every time a paycheck hits, then you go in and give each dollar a job on your line items. And every day you're looking at, okay, I got $150 in this week, 25 is going towards food or whatever. And then you categorize it with the goal. And then when you spend the money, you go in and put it towards that maximum and make sure you're not going over your goals. So it's a very active form of budgeting. Finally, there's the envelope budget where you put discretionary spending into each category and then put it in an envelope. Just take the cash out of your account. So this is, I want to spend $200 at restaurants this month. Put that in an envelope and carry it around with you. And once you're done with the money in the envelope, you're out of money for your restaurant budget. So it's a very good way to keep yourself on track. But who carries around cash these days? It's kind of tough and somewhat dangerous. There is an app called Envelopes, which will help you do that in a digital fashion. Again, help you track how much you're spending. So as a resident, when you have limited income, some of the more precise budgeting types work better. I think of it as, depending on the criticalness of your money situation. So think about a heart failure patient, if they're super overloaded and in the ICU, we're gathering all kinds of data, really minute data, right? We might have a Swan-Ganz and we might be looking at Folian for strict I's and O's, right? We're getting very precise information to turn their critical state around. And as they downgrade to the floor, take out the Foley, we become less strict with our I's and O's. We're less strict about what they're eating. And as they get home, now they're going out to bars again. You might be having a beer or two. And we're definitely not monitoring I's and O's. We're just maintaining. So just coming in and checking weights once in a while, right? So as your state becomes less and less critical, you can get less and less granular with your budget. But when you're really trying to turn things around, I think people should be more granular and really get all the data they can.
Those all sound great. And I wanted to also let our listeners know that on your website, there's a spreadsheet they can download, correct?
Yes. Yeah. There's a spreadsheet sample that you can download. I think a Google spreadsheet is great because both my husband and I can log into it at the same time and make changes at the same time. And it's live. And I'm not compromising my login data for my bank accounts to another company. We both work well that way. He's a project manager, so he lives in Excel spreadsheets and Google spreadsheets. So it works for him. But, some people might not like that. It might be a little too much or whatever. Everyone has a different style, and that's totally okay. If you prefer apps, there are a lot of good apps out there too. YNAB I mentioned, which is You Need a Budget, is what it stands for, is a great app where it helps you form that budget in a digital fashion. It tracks the money coming in. It also helps you account for credit card payments well, which is somewhat difficult to account for in other apps like Every Dollar from the Dave Ramsey team, but it's a lot more granular. You have to go in and categorize each spend. It will learn and then start categorizing the same thing in the same bucket for you. But initially, every time you spend money, you have to go and put it into a category in your app. And so that didn't work well for my husband and I because I was doing all of that and he sort of tuned out. So I really need him to sit down with me. Let's do it all together, and we've gotten more efficient with it on the spreadsheet. But there are apps out there. YNAB and Every Dollar are the most commonly used ones. There's also Personal Capital that will budget your money for you. It will automatically put things into categories. I find that it's not as Personal Capital is actually now Empower. They changed their name. It is good, but I don't think it's as good at the granular details. And sometimes it categorizes things in places I probably wouldn't. But it does give you kind of an overall look at your net worth if you put in all your accounts. I will caveat that by saying that last time I updated my Empower, I got a hacking attempt. And then I deactivated my Empower and took all my information off because I wasn't sure if it came from them or not. But anyway, that's why I don't like connecting my bank to other apps because you never know when they have a data breach. But apps do make your life easier if you're trying to budget.
And I think our listeners may be partial to apps just given who they are. But one thing, just to recap, which of the budgeting methods do you think may be the best for the resident and maybe even the apps? Just a couple that you think are the best out of the ones you mentioned.
For residents, I think a zero-based or line item budget is the way to go. Give every dollar a job and realize as a resident that you can make that difference. You can amass a delta. It's tough. Of course, it's tough. But if you're mindful, even if you just save $50, $100 a month and put that to work, it can make a big difference in your life as an attending to have a little bit of cash reserve or investment reserve that you've already started on. Compounding is an incredibly powerful thing. And if you can get 4 more years of compounding on your investments, it makes a big difference. I mean, thousands of dollars of a difference when you get to be an attending or into your retirement age. And getting into that savings habit is arguably even more important. Developing these budget skills on a smaller budget is even more important than just putting that money away, because then you know what your spends are. You can better gauge whether you should buy that house as an attending or not, because you know how much you are spending as a resident and how much more you need and how much more will tip you over into the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. What app should they be using if they want to use an app? I think YNAB is great for residents and it's relatively secure. They don't sell your data. Mint was one of the apps that people were using that recently went away. It was bundling data. It was free, but it was bundling data and selling it to, advertisers and such. I wouldn't want that. So it's secure and you do have to pay for it, but that fee can be easily accounted for and paid for by the savings you're going to get just by budgeting. So I think if you're going to do that, do an app. Probably YNAB is the one I would recommend. If you're going to do a line item spreadsheet, go ahead and get that free download from thefrugalphysician.com.
And we'll have links to your website and some of the great benefits you've described so far so that people could easily get more information. We have just have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to just get a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on credit cards? You mentioned credit cards. I know they can be very dangerous, but do you find that residents could have them in emergencies, or what are your thoughts on them?
Well, credit cards are like fire. Fire was one of the most revolutionary things for humanity and helps us, cook food and stay warm. However, it can wreak havoc and burn your house down, right? So you have to be careful and mindful with it. And if you are, then it's an incredibly powerful tool. I think credit cards are the same way. You can get in a whole lot of trouble if you start amassing any kind of balance on your credit card at the end of the month. They charge you at the rates of 17 to 20% interest plus fees, right? If you don't pay off your balance in full at the end of the month. So if you're going to use credit cards, you have to promise yourself, make a pact with yourself that you're going to pay it off at the end of the month and don't use it as a way to, borrow money. But if you use it responsibly, then credit cards build your credit history, which is incredibly important when you go out to buy a house or a car or anything else. If your credit score is important going forward. So the longer credit history you have, the longer that you show the credit agencies that you can make on-time payments and be responsible with credit, the better your credit score is going to be. So yes, so that's important. And then points and cash back. If you are savvy and can amass points and then use that for travel, I think that's a great way to balance your life. That's how we traveled in that initial phase when we were trying to get out of debt and pay off my student loans. We traveled on credit card points. And I can say, at this point, there are very few vacations where I've paid full price for anything. Most of the time, we're traveling for free using credit card points. And you can totally do that if you're responsible. As a doctor, especially when you become an attending, it's going to be easier and easier to get the higher luxury cards and have a better travel experience, amass more points. and become smart with your travel and spend less money traveling and more time having valuable experiences. So I think credit cards are great when you're careful with them and don't let them burn your house down.
It's a good way to put it. And I really like the analogy. So for residents who may be listening, who still are hesitant, I can't do it, it's not for me, what words of advice would you give to those individuals listening who are still a little hesitant about this process of getting a budget started?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's easy. You're going to probably the first 3 months, it's going to be a little difficult finding the way that you best budget. It took us a little while to figure out, YNAB's not for us. We tried every dollar. We started with the spreadsheet and we're like, this is terrible. And then went to the apps, came back to the spreadsheet and we're like, okay, it takes a little while to get used to the concept. But as a resident, as someone in medicine, you are no stranger to hard work and persistence. And I can tell you it is completely worth it. It is so worth it because money is one of the biggest things in your life. Money is not the most important thing, but money, having investments gives you freedom, right? And freedom is so important to all of us because at some point you're going to maybe not want to have all your income eggs in one basket, right? You're going to want to be able to move around, do what you want, make the life that you want in medicine, and having money in the bank gives you the freedom to do so. If you want to spend more time with your kids, pick up less shifts, having money in the bank gives you the freedom to do so. Think of it as paying your future self. When you're saving the money, you are paying for that freedom in the future. And now, being mindful with your money gives you more freedom today as well because you have a budget for that. You're not on a budget.
Very well said and very inspiring. We actually have one more question we generally ask all of our guests at the end of our podcast, and it's, what brings you joy in life?
Oh my God, so many things. Number one, my kids. My kids are like the best thing I've ever done. And obviously also the most difficult thing, as they were the inspiration for my financial awakening. And it has been the best investment of my time for sure. And then of course, tennis, running, jazz, music, medicine, helping my patients. There's so many things. Then the joy is easy to find once you start looking for it and you have the freedom to do so.
Well, Dr. Spath, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And we will, for the listeners, put links to your website on the notes of this podcast. But again, it was very enlightening, lots of great information, and I'm sure that our listeners will really enjoy it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much. And that's a wrap on my conversation with the TarHeal Podcast. I hope you found our discussion useful, maybe even a bit inspiring, and definitely relatable. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend who might need a little financial pep talk? Don't forget to subscribe to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with a frugal physician for more down-to-earth advice and real-life stories. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow us on social media, drop comments, and let me know what topics you'd like to hear about next. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, stay fabulous, keep chasing that financial freedom, and stay frugal, y'all. Catch you next time. Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Rabbits, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Rabbits builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonrabbits.com today and embark on your journey to safeguarding your future.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.